Baseball season is truly upon us. Arpin, you're wearing your Expos cap today. That's good.
In honor of opening day, but more so. So this is the March 31st episode of the Basu and Godin Notebook. Welcome, everyone. The Canadiens are in a playoff spot as of this morning. So they are in a playoff spot after the start of baseball season. And they are assuredly playing meaningful games into April. So...
Yeah. Whereas baseball teams right now are not playing meaningful games.
No.
Unless you're the Chicago White Sox, where you're still not out of contention.
Right. This is the best part of the year for the Chicago White Sox, but that's part of the year for these Canadiens. You know, a big win against Florida Panthers on Sunday. They're third in a row against the defending Stanley Cup champs. They have a chance to complete a season sweep tomorrow at Bell Center, which should be rocking.
Did that win against Florida? Do you think it salvages the trip, or is it just not enough so far for what they needed to do?
I think no. If you look at the trip as a whole, no. But I think it was significant in the sense that, you see, I looked at the third period against Carolina, and yes, the Hurricanes were up 3-1. Yes, they were protecting a lead. Yes. I hate it when coaches, and Marty's done it many times, when coaches look at a game score or a game effect influenced period of play.
Yeah, score effect
influenced period of play and say, oh, this is a sign. I saw that as a sign of improvement. But I really saw the third period in Carolina as a sign of improvement in the way they were playing. They really did. They took it to the Hurricanes to some extent. They had some pushback, and started playing something close that was a closer resemblance to the style that's given them some success this season. And so I was not shocked when that carried over into the Florida game, because if there's been one pattern this season with the lulls that they've had, is you usually saw signs of them coming out of it in a loss, and then it translated to a win, and then that carried for a while. So the Canadiens can only hope that pattern continues, because if that's the case, then they actually managed to cut this lull off relatively quickly. We'll see if that's the case this week. And I don't even think losing against Florida on Tuesday, which I imagine is quite likely to happen. I mean, it's very rare that you beat the same team 4 times in a row, let alone the defending Stanley Cup champs. But, you go to Boston. There's Boston and Montreal on Thursday. There's Philly after that. There's Nashville after that. There's very winnable games beyond. We'll see if that's the case. We'll see if this is the start of a little hot streak to end the season. And what I found was meaningful in that third period in Carolina is that it did not include either Arbor Xhekaj or David Savard. That was the 7-11 game that immediately followed our last podcast. And obviously, Arbor basically played himself out of that game by making a pretty bad mistake on a critical goal by the Canes. But Savard also was barely used in that third period, and we saw the same thing in Florida on Sunday, where Savard was barely used in the third period. And so I think that the uptick in the Canadiens' level of play I don't think those are two separate. I don't think that's a coincidence, basically. Like, I do think that there's some correlation between the fact that Savard played less and that the Canadiens performed better as a result. So basically they went to a 5-man decor in both games. Struble survived the purge in that sense, because he deserved it. And so that's good to see that he kind of earned that. But it was interesting to me in those two games how he really cut his bench on defense to 5, even in the game in Florida when he only dressed 6D, still went down to 5 basically on purpose. And the Canadiens were better for it, frankly. There was a real impact there. And I don't want to pin everything on David Savard. That wouldn't be fair, but it's impossible not to see every time he's on the ice. The Canadiens are in their end, and he's just slow to pucks, and he's slow to spots, and that's why he's good on the penalty kill. He doesn't have to move that much, but in any situation where he has to move, the Canadiens are hurt by it.
Yeah, there's with Gouli's return. I mean, the Canadiens are in a much better position. Having 5 trustworthy defensemen, playing a regular shift is a huge help. Of course, playing 7 defensemen in Carolina did not provide the desired effect. You had mentioned beforehand how Marty hates it. So if the results were not going to be convincing, he would not stick with that strategy for much longer. So he let that go in Florida. But yeah, to me, it's interesting because it affected Gouli's return affects Savard in the sense that, you can turn to 5 defensemen like with regular shifts. I think that Struble has proven that also he can help reduce the load on some other guys, because you can tell like Mike Matheson's minutes are slightly down. The last couple of games, it was not exactly what we've been accustomed to before, and that's good. If you have a number 5D that can chip in and play 16 minutes and occasionally go play with Carrier, occasionally play with Hutson, because to me that's the only unfortunate part. It's that tandem that Struble had with Hutson was so effective. It was vulnerable by the time that Gouli was coming back, because Gouli was going to play top 4 minutes. So I'm not surprised by the outcome, but I like the fact that even if you put Struble in the third pairing and you play him mix and match with other guys once in a while to reduce mainly Matheson's load, it really helps all of the D-core. And you're only going to give a handful of minutes to Savard there. And I stick with what I said a week ago about the fact that there's going to be back-to-back games, and it could be also there a good opportunity for Martin St-Louis to use that as an excuse to replace Savard with Jacky, so that you can make sure that Jacky doesn't sit for too long. He made a stupid mistake, boneheaded play, trying to hit a guy and kill the proper way to defend the 3-on-2, and it turned into a 2-on-1 because of that. So he put himself in that situation, but you want to make sure that you keep him, because Jacky has made some good progress this year. You don't want his game to slip too much. And I think it'd be also interesting to see how he could fare with somebody else than David Savard. And if he ends up sharing those third pairing minutes with Struble, it might not be all bad. So it's worth giving it a shot, during one of those back-to-back situations until the end of the season. But for now, at least, there's some reliability there with Gouli coming back and Struble being consistent in his play.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out that, Matheson basically didn't force, but I think made it clear to Marty that he could stand to play a little less. I mean, he played 25-45 in Philly, and that was probably his worst puck management game we've seen perhaps all season, but really.
Well, there was a game earlier in the season where he said this is probably the worst game I've ever played. You remember?
Right. Yes, that's true. So at least since then, but it was bad. It was incredibly bad. And getting him into a more, if they could just get him into the mindset that he has when he faces the McKinnons and the McDavids and all that, and we mentioned it in the last episode, but they could just get him into that mindset all the time. That would help. But, he's down to a more reasonable number as a result. Hutson has been the ice time leader by a little bit. in both those games, and so it's
Well, he's emerged. He's emerged as their number one defenseman now.
yeah, 100%, especially in late game situations, and even when they were defending that lead against Florida with the goalie pulled, he was out there, knowing full well that Florida was about to pull their goalie. He was out there, and so and we talked about Hutson in the last episode. He's only further augmented everything we said in the last episode, but really, to me, over the course of the 4-game road trip, like by far the Canadiens' best player. Not in Florida, obviously the top line kind of carried them in that game, and we'll get to them in a sec. But no, Hutson was hands down their best player over the 4-game sample, and really just showed that he can take anything you can throw at him. It's gonna be imperative here for Matheson to kind of recalibrate his priorities, and not. He's supremely confident in his ability because he is such an elegant, powerful, elusive skater. And he will always have confidence in his edge work and in his ability to lose guys skating and just outskate people. And that's what gets him into trouble sometimes, is that he makes that calculation based on his confidence, which you never want to take from him. But everything that Smarty said about the downside of the temptation and all that stuff that seems to be top of mind for him when he's facing a clear defensive assignment. If they could just get him to think that way all the time, whether he's facing one of the league's best players or not, they would have a much better defenseman on their hands. But Hutson has essentially slotted him into a more appropriate chair, where he's essentially a second pairing defenseman right now. And that might be the most significant. That's a significant development, along with the fact that the Savard's usage is starting to reflect his level of play, which for a long time it wasn't. We'll see if that continues, because I think Marty and especially his teammates have a ton of respect for David Savard. He's an incredibly important person in that room. But over the last couple of games, at least, and really over the last couple of weeks, we've started to see that his usage is better reflecting how he's playing.
Yeah. Regarding Matheson, though, if you decide to use him as a hard matchup guy defensively facing, the opponent's top lines and all that, I think that you'll be better served at keeping his minutes where you ideally would want them in home games compared to away games, because you have the last change. So in that sense, because otherwise the other team is going to send their best guys on the ice more often than not. So the fact that the Canadiens have 6 games at home until the end of the season and only 3 on the road, it will probably enable Martin St-Louis to have a little bit of a better control over which situations he wants to send Matheson out there and how hard he wants those matchups to be. But I think that the schedule will help in that sense.